take the practical portion of what I'm doing, specifically in the AI world, and just kind of putting it out there. Is I think overwhelmingly there's so much buzzwords about it
Mm.
and maybe some people mess around with ChatGPT or something like that, that it's kind of tough to see that next step of how you can actually get something out of it. So I
Yeah.
wanted to take a I wanted to take a case study of our newest hire and how, he started mid-May, but he's barely 60 days in. So kind of going from there for, all right, how can I had a bunch of things already. And, since I think the last hire before him was a year before that, and technology changes so quickly. So how do you make sure stuff is up to date? So the nice part is,
Mm.
especially in dynamically changing environments like this is another great way to do it.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing about these webinars is a lot of it is just everyone is kind of learning and growing this technology at the same time. So, there's no a lot of people are like, "Oh, we're experts at this." That's like, "Well, you're probably not. Like you're making this stuff up by the seat of your pants as much as everyone else."
That's the echoes of my father's early time in IT in the late 80s. It's history doesn't repeat, but boy does it sure rhyme. And Alfred, I see your hand raised, and go ahead, and if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, or Ryan, if you want to answer that for him. But awesome. With it coming up on 3 minutes in, I think I'm okay, and we'll allow folks to trickle in as we go. But today, welcome everyone. I'm Will McPhee, the CEO of System Support Managed IT Service Provider out of Marshfield, Massachusetts. And today, I wanted to go over onboarding new hires using AI assistance. We're really looking here at the summer, trying to make things a lot easier, trying to do as much as we can for, hey, maybe folks are stressed out, want to see this AI thing. There's all this promise to it. And, rather than having just a generic HR, how to train someone piece, saying, all right, how can you use AI to be able to do this? So why are we here? If you're a business owner, you're juggling almost everything: schedules, inventory, staff, client communications, marketing, sales, HR, strategic investments, financials. You got every hat on your head all the way up to the ceiling and through it. And a lot of folks need help being able to train someone and being able to get that next person up to speed so that you can start taking those hats off. And hopefully, the dream being you get down to the one strategic leadership hat that, the really mature companies seem to run at. So today we're going to go over how different AI tools like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Notebook LM will help you get together that training program that help get new people up to speed. So the inspiration behind this is my most recent new hire, Nolan. If you have the pleasure of working with us, you might have bumped into Nolan. And Nolan came to us with, now he had a computer science degree from UMass Amherst, but computer science is very programming heavy. It's not the real tactile, helping things get working again stuff that we do here. And, he had come out of school, he was working for a commercial cleaning company. And in the interview process, he had a lot of the things that you can't teach, the showing up on time, willingness to learn. So those unknowns that you try and search for in the interview process, he had. And so the answer being that, if you have the things I can't teach, I can teach you the rest on the technology side. So I'll be perfectly honest, I've had a lot of training materials ahead of time that I had written out, but I regenerated a lot of them in the interest of some of the new tools that are out here. And I got to say, the ability for him to get up to speed and the stress for me trying to come up with all this training material was a lot lighter using these different tools. So the first part I want to start with is overwhelmingly what are the requirements? What do you require to get set up? And I do see a question about various AI options. There are a bunch that are out there. But for getting set up and those prerequisites, as far as which AI to use, I'll touch on that a little bit here in the getting set up. But way more important is that file format matters. So the files that you generate, you do want them in a specific format so that any AI, regardless of flavor, can read them appropriately. The easiest thing for AI to digest is the written word. Yes, there are graphical processors, but the written word is the language and large language model. So if things are comma separated variables for spreadsheets, I can tell you this with unfortunate, a lot of lessons learned, is Excel, it does not like Excel sheets. So the XLSX doesn't work, but the CSV, it reads it so much better. It just seems to get the context because it's word, comma. PDF, of course, written word, easy to read on Word documents. So as far as, it might be, why can't I just upload a video? And you're going to see next as to why I ask about, having something like business standard with Teams. You could also have Zoom. You need effectively something that's going to easily make transcriptions for whatever it is that you're doing. So really, as part of these prereqs, have something that can record and make transcriptions. Zoom is great. Google Meet has the same thing. Microsoft Teams also has a transcription ability. And then the other reason for why you want something recorded with something like a paid license is so that your data stays private. If you're showing someone exactly, and especially because it's about training new folks, if you do things a certain way that make you unique, you don't really want to have that out in the main training model. And then when somebody has a generic prompt, go and get the answer of like, oh yeah, sure, it's this. And this also goes for any AI models that you use. So, the idea being that if you have ChatGPT, don't use the free version, get the paid one. It starts with $25 per user with a minimum 2 users for an annual commitment. For the Microsoft flavor, you've got Copilot, that's an add-on. And if you're a Google Workspace person, Gemini has been built into what you're doing, and that's why Google jacked its prices up recently and locked everybody into an annual commitment. So if you're wondering why, and I do realize someone here on the webinar is a Google employee, so he can chastise me afterwards. So, and of course, my phone lit up for that one too. Fun. But as far as what model for it, to be perfectly honest, the nuances to under the hood for how Anthropologic's Claude, Grok, Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, you probably have to be doing something very specific to start seeing those differences between the different models. There's nuance to everything. The devil's in the details. But as far as which model is best, frankly, it's the one that's going to be easiest for you to use. And the ones that are already built in are a great starting point. And then if you're not sure, I personally use a lot of ChatGPT. I found it personally to perform a little better than Copilot for what I do. And most of that is programming stuff. But anyways, so getting new folks ready. 5-step plan for being able to get someone from zero to hero. Number 1 is a training plan. So ironically, you can have the AI lay out what exactly it is that you should have them do. And even for a training plan, you can sit there, lecture at them, do whatever you want, but you also have to make sure, you have to test them on, are they getting it? So I actually stole that model from my time in the nuclear world when I went through my reactor operator training at NC State. And what it was is we had a qual card, and the qual card had a system, and the senior reactor operators would quiz us on the system about a whole bunch of different things of, what do you do if this happens? What do you do if that happens? All beyond what was in the training manual. So I did the same thing, took a system, made a bunch of quiz questions. One way to, from there, once you kind of have a structure of what your lesson plan is, so the training plan being what pieces should they hit, and then the quiz questions being what are you going to ask them about? You have some lectures. You go over and perform the training with them. You show them how to do something. That's where that call recording, that's where that screen recording software like Teams, Zoom, you don't need a specific one like Loom or anything like that. Chances are you can use what you already have. And then the last is, creating the educational assets at the end that, now that you've got a bunch of questions and some quizzes and a bunch of material that you lectured ad hoc on, you don't have to keep doing it, which is great. And that leads to the final part of, don't panic, of you save it all for the next one. And that way, when the next employee comes around, the lectures could be a lot shorter. So the idea is being they've gone through some of the materials already and you could just answer the nuance questions, kind of test them more than you have to lecture at them. So I love, big friendly letters. Don't panic. For those of you who are fans of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, should recognize the don't panic printed in large friendly letters. And, I completely understand that every company has a different degree of maturity for how much of a training program they put together. Like the NRC had classes, an entire training division. They had a whole building in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which we would expect from, federal government body, right? But small and medium-sized businesses don't really have the resources to be able to do that. But you might have a few resources kicking around, and you might even have some material that maybe the vendors that you use have some training material. But if you already have it, excellent. You can use it to supercharge what you're already doing. But if not, good news. Transcriptions from your lectures will become the basis of these different documents that you have going forward. So, all right, let's get into step one. Creating that training plan. So you start with your job description. Chances are you put a job description out to have this new hire come in. So you already have a little bit of what their responsibilities are, what you're looking for, requirements. So some of that, chances are you already have that in there, and you just copy and paste what you had on Indeed or why Monster.com. Yeah, Monster was a hiring site, right? I've only ever used Indeed, so forgive my references. Or maybe you have one through your payroll provider or something like that. So you might not put your specifics on a lot of that job description, but take that job description and add a few of the specifics of the systems and vendors that you work with. So maybe you don't really want to let too much of the secret sauce of I use this program to achieve this, or maybe you have some really straightforward business standard, everybody uses AutoCAD, everybody uses Revit type deal. Yeah, you put them on there and update a little bit of some of those specifics that you work with, and bonus points if those vendors have public-facing knowledge bases. The good news is you copy and paste some links, and you'll see that later on. And then for your job description and for some of these specifics, I stress again a paid AI system like Copilot, Gemini, and ChatGPT, because you are about to enter into putting the secret sauce as to how you do what you do. And you don't want that in the hands of a competitor or anybody else, because that's what makes you you. So, sure, there are thousands of people that do IT managed services like we do, but this is, I'll be perfectly honest, one of the things that sets us apart is the ability to go through and get what would have been a tier 1 technician of just let me reset your password to a tier 2 level performance of, going across multiple systems within 90 days. This is part of my secret sauce. So because of it, I'm going to not put that out into something that's publicly available. So, all right, you got your job description. You got your job description. You got a few of your specific systems. You got a few, things that are in there. So you go ahead and you fire off a prompt in your paid version of whatever. If you're using ChatGPT, you could use a project to keep some of the context together. Those are those little sorted folders on the left. The Copilot allows you to do something similar, but you kick it off with a prompt along the lines of, based on the attached job description, please create a 90-day training plan with milestones to complete by the first week, first 30 days, first 60 days, and at the end of 90 days. The training plan should include specific items like, I put some in that are specific to me, 10 tickets per week by 30 days, more expectations. And I actually have mine that are there. And also, if you need a refresher on prompt engineering for being able to make sure that you have kick-ass prompts, we've got a webinar and some resources for that, for, how to ask good questions. So I'll show you what I got. This was one that I had ChatGPT make, and, I put it into Word so I could edit it around, but I've used this to track if my new hire is doing his job and is coming up to speed. So I have everything they're supposed to do in the first day. Some of these were really simple. And then again, ChatGPT, when I first prompted, it's not really going to know all the logins that I have. So, I made sure to list out all the logins I'm aware that they're going to have, made sure that they signed into critical pieces. And then a big thing in our business is tracking your time, making sure you're logging what you do each day, because we are a service business. That I have some things that he's got to do by the end of the first week, making sure that he's getting started on a couple things, the first few Easter eggs, expanded that week out to the first 30-day expectations. And I also fed in some of the employee handbook to this as well. I should, especially things like consistent attendance, consistent time entries, and wearing the company uniform. At the end of the first 60 days, this is actually what we're working on right now, and he's working through a lot of these already. And then at the end of the first 90 days, here he is. He's right at that, for Massachusetts hiring laws, right on that line, right? But this is where, hey, has he been keeping up with the program? So as you can see, 5-page expectation for a training plan of what type of training he needs to complete and what are some of the little, what are some of the little steps that he should handle by, each point that he's at. I'll go ahead and take that off and continue on. So congratulations. You did a little prompt. You now have given the new employee an idea of what the next 90 days look like. They know what to expect, they know what to study, and you know what you need to lecture on. So, maybe one of those, a great example on our end is Repair Shopper, which is our ticketing system. That knowledge base doesn't really tell someone how to do their job. There are some basics. There's a lot of customization that we have. So I know that I need to lecture on our ticketing system and talk about how the ticketing system works and what we got to do there. So next, for some of those specifics and making sure that, we have to trust but verify. Love that phrase. And one of them is especially for, how do we know that if they went through the knowledge base or they, did a training video, how do we know that they actually are effective with it without, for lack of a better term, throwing them to the wolves in front of a client and then having us go like, oh God, he really dropped the ball on that one for, trying to handle that client question. How do you make sure that you suss out those gotchas well beforehand? Quiz questions. You go ahead and make up some testing questions to see if they actually know what they're talking about for each one of those training milestones. So for each major system, a major process, or a function that you have, just make a quick list of at least 15 questions that a competent employee should be able to answer relatively quickly. This again comes from that reactor training of, hey, when those alarms go off, there should not be a giant sitting around wondering what it is that you're supposed to do. Hey, you got to kind of just go to make sure that everything works. So how do you do that? So you have those 15 questions, and chances are, if you are the business owner, you've been doing that job, you can come up with those 15 questions in 5 minutes. Shut your door, sit there and think about, all right, what are the things that somebody has to know about blank? And you just, tell me how to do this, tell me how to do this, tell me how to do this. And if not, if, as we mentioned earlier, chances are you're here to learning how to try and train employees faster is because your stack of hats is through the ceiling. You could also ask the AI system to create ones based on the system referencing. And that, hey, ChatGPT, here is the knowledge base for Huntress. Create 15 quizzing questions that a, insert job role here should know without looking up references about this program. And it'll create those 15 questions for you pretty easy. So if you don't know exactly what it is that you're looking for, you can use the AI there, but usually this is one that's pretty human of like whacking away on it, especially if there's something specific. So this one takes a little bit longer, but again, you have a knowledge base, you could just have the AI come up with it too, especially if maybe that was something that somebody else had done that had recently left the company and you didn't have a lot of training material for them. So you could go ahead and quiz the quizzer. But for some of it, when you're prompting into the AI, rather than having one chat and saying, yeah, now do this for this one, yeah, do this for this one, it's important to remember that there's a context window for any of the AI models that's behind the scenes. And those context windows can really get out of hand with if you make too many prompts, it'll start forgetting things. And that's based on how these AIs are set up. So you want to make having that project file, you want to make a new chat every time for each system. So that way the context doesn't start leaking into other places. Now you might take the questions if there is something where there's some cross training. So, maybe there's something about, maybe there's something you want to quiz on for how does, this system affect this other system. You might want to make a chat that's specific to that type of quizzing. So the good news, is, again, make one chat for an employee handbook, for example, a chat for issue escalations and everything like that. All right. Well, so far, 2 down, 3 to go. You've got a question bank that covers the major systems and pieces that you have, and that's based on the job description, that training plan that you have that came out of that job description for you. So now it's time to put together those lectures and trying to get that educational material into the hands of the employee. So, you can do all these first 2 things here you can do before they show up. So if, maybe you've got an intern that you're waiting to graduate in June, and you said, yes, you can absolutely come on board in April. The nice part is you can go through these training material portions before they show up. So in building out the lectures, the next part I want to introduce is Notebook LM. So this one is outside of the ChatGPT and Copilot ones, and it's a tool that we've been using that is really unique as far as what it's able to do. And it can really put together some interesting learning materials. So for example, I would recommend that when they set up an account, the employee sets up, it's specific to Google. Notebook LM is specific to Google. And I would have them set it up with their work email because, you are going to feed it some corporate information. So, hey, it might be a standalone account, but hey, make sure it's under the, at acmecorporation.com. But the cool part is Notebook LM allows you to add different sources. So you could, if you are a Google user against a Google product, you could add different documents very quickly. You can link to websites, knowledge bases, YouTube videos. If it's something that's a little more public, maybe you have a non-listed YouTube video because you have recorded something already. You can also just straight unload on a bunch of text as well. So what this can do is you can offer some insights, typing questions to it that this becomes a little bit of, back and forth. One really cool thing you can do is people learn different ways, right? Some are better visual learners, some are better audio learners. Notebook LM allows you to make a podcast with two hosts that your employee can then, download and listen to as they're driving into work. So you can make these audio overviews based on the sources that you upload, and it will make a podcast, which is it's pretty cool. And, that way, if, you really got a go-getter, again, you remember trying to interview for those appropriate things that are there. But, based on this Google Workspace questions and that Google Help, it just made, in the time that I hit load, a 40-minute podcast that I could download and give to an employee. And it goes back and forth for that. Whole, yeah, you could do multiple guests, and it even has the other podcast hosts do. So it is really interesting. So this is a way that when you're going to do the lectures, if it is just a bridge too far to sit down an hour a day to go over something with the employee, if you have those qualification questions of like what you're looking for the employee to do and a link to whatever their help desk articles are, it could make that lecture for you. And then all you have to do is just try and quiz them at the end. But let's say you don't really want to outsource and hand that part off too much. Like, hey, I really want to have that hand to hand. And some of it too is to make sure that that employee is, not burning out or something, get that face-to-face time. Well, you can go ahead and lecture them at length. And if you don't have a lot of procedures or how-to already written down, secretly, this is also the easiest way to get them created. So anytime you're going to sit down and meet with an employee to do one of these trainings, just put something on your calendar that, automatically generates the Teams meeting, automatically generates a Google Meet or a Zoom meeting on the calendar. And then even if you're sitting with the employee, you record the conversation, you get a transcription out of it. When Nolan's in my office and we're going through the nuances of Threat Locker, I just put a Teams meeting, I hit record, and I have a transcription. Not only can Nolan go back and look at whatever I was doing because he was invited to the meeting, the permissions are set up that, he can view it, but the transcription is also there as a giant Word document for how things are done. And then the nice part of having that paid AI, you have that transcription, you put that transcription into one of the AIs and say, hey, clean this up and turn it into a policy document. Because chances are there are a lot of audio verite in a 1 hour meeting of, dog gets up, stretches, barks at an Amazon driver. That's one of my personal favorites. Yeah, maybe you got distracted, somebody called, somebody walked in the office. You can have that transcription cleaned up by the AI instead of sending it to a technical writer or, having to, God forbid, transcribe it yourself. So the nice part is you start building those training assets of the how-to. So, and then the nice part too, the reason why we did the training questions and we did those question banks is that if you sit down and you're like, all right, I have to train this employee, this is telling you what to do. That, all right, I know that I need to talk to them about Threat Locker. And in talking to them about Threat Locker, I need to ask them the following questions. So then Really what I do for my lectures is I pull the bank of questions and I just go through and answer every question because that's what I'm looking for. And then when I go to do the quizzing on the other end, I might throw a few curveballs. And actually, really, what the quizzing is I bring up real tickets or real examples and just kind of go, how would you handle this? Picking on, I'll pick on Sentinel-1, an antivirus program we have across everybody is, hey, the user states that they're unable to open zip files. What are you going to look at? And it's like, all right, well, why are they asking me in the Sentinel-1? And you watch them try and understand, all right, what could be affected here? So, I mentioned a little bit about, using that AI platform to take the transcription, turn it into an SOP or a study guide. And if it is a study guide and maybe the employee wants to go back over it, they could upload it to their notebook LM to include in those materials that, instead of just listening to you lecture and have it be all over the place, it could be restructured into podcast format for better digestion, especially in that notebook LM too. If they have a notebook that's just on the antivirus, you could factor in the vendor training to add more context. So there might be some things that maybe the vendor doesn't have a great knowledge base and it's all over the place. So your unified lecturing is then supported by whatever's in that website. Notebook LM is great for that. And then again, if you're wondering what to do for these training sessions, you have that lecture, you want to make the materials, again, just answer the question bank. It gives you exactly what you need to do. So at this point, we're standing pretty high on the mountain. We're above the tree line because we have a 90-day training guide, a test guide for each of the systems or processes that you have, a series of documents outlining how you perform the job for when you're lecturing on here's how this works, and then an employee who's hopefully been paying attention for the past couple days. And then the best part of all these items are now in file form, and you've created an educational asset. So now you have a series of videos, you have a series of test questions, you have a series of a plan. So you now have an educational asset so that you as the owner could now hand this off to a more senior employee to handle the training. So then, maybe the senior employee just quizzes the employee, doesn't have to do the lectures, doesn't have to do the other pieces. I mean, don't outsource everything to just watching the videos because, people like people. Watching videos for 8 hours a day for your first month sounds like a specific version of hell. So if there are lectures and other pieces that are there, don't forget the human element in all of this. But this training guide and the AI enablement is mostly to say that you don't have to sit down and write out, if I look at that qual card that we have, so if we're looking at examples of those qualification questions, our qual card is 40 pages long of straight questions of what a fully qualified system support employee is able to do. Everything from an overview to the company, how does networking work, the security culture of what you can and can't do, and even just our ticketing system. I mean, that one's at least 2 pages. So I originally, a couple years ago, had written this out, and it took at least 60 days before my new hire started. And frankly, I was building the railroad as I went along. This was well before any AI tools were out there. But now this same thing can be done in, frankly, an afternoon of making questions on different systems. So for those who love going above and beyond, because now you have a training plan, a question bank, and a series of transcription lectures, you could also take all these assets, put it into a single repository, and create a training agent. So you could separate the questions and the actual training material to make a test proctor or a tutor. So that way you could have it where, if you're really intense on the testing, you could have this AI agent be like, all right, I am gonna, quiz me on Huntress, and then have it, draw from the question bank and go ahead and do those prompts. That's a fun one. And then, the more information, the more context you feed these systems, vendor resources, new recordings, the more comprehensive that those agents could grow. And, they, especially too, I have a sneaking suspicion the younger folks entering the workforce are going to be very AI first. I'm already seeing it with the interns that I'm getting between high school interns that I've had from around here, plus I have an intern from Bridgewater State, and I have to say their ChatGPT instance is open all the time. So they're going to be very AI native first. So this just kind of gives you, rather than them prompting the big wide world of what should I do, this gives it so that it's very focused to what it is that you do. And I can say, at least for Nolan, who is, from the younger generations and is very AI first. Yeah, they go there first for the question. So having those systems in place makes it so that you're meeting them where they are. And kind of goes back to that notebook LM too, audio learner, visual learner, written word learner. So bringing it all together, AI isn't here to replace anyone. It's here to support it and to make things go faster. It's the same thing. The computer or the internet wasn't here to replace it. It's here to support it. Are there certain things that might be replaced? Yeah, sure. Ask a couple of the guys who sell promotional products these days. Chances are they sold forms back in the day and Microsoft Word replaced that. Sure. But for most business owners, I certainly doubt that AI is going to replace a lot of businesses wholesale. But the businesses that learn how to leverage the AI are the ones that are going to completely outcompete their neighbors. And, also too, I will stress that, AI is in its infancies and it's in its infancy. It's just getting started. It's the same way that the internet, Google, and a lot of these systems, I referenced it earlier, like when my dad first came into this industry, System Support was founded in 1989. My dad was doing it for 2 years internal to a different company. The history doesn't repeat itself, but as short as rhyme. So we're looking at something similar of this is really going to make some crazy changes for how people do work. But, we're going to start with the easy stuff. It's not, sure, there are promises of like answering phones and complete automated virtual assistants, but this thing has to be able to read a spreadsheet reliably first before we get there. So
Yeah, I spent a lot of time yesterday playing with graphics, and I'm like, we're doing a rollout for next month, and I keep saying like, okay, I want X, Y, and Z in the picture, and then we'll go on to make the next picture. And it's like I've included X, Y, like it kept putting like a letter envelope in every picture, and I'm like, remove that, and then it would, and then the next thing it's like, okay, here's your envelope back. I'm like, stop putting envelopes on things, and it would not.
it's still in its infancy.
Yeah.
So but the nice part with straight written word, where I'm seeing it, this kind of feeds to a little bit of the what's next. Where I'm seeing it strongest is the written word, documents, coding for sure, but that's usually beyond most of the scope of a business owner. That's usually something somebody else does. But specific to the written word, it's doing fantastic. So we have an AI starter pack at systemsupport.com/AI guide where, we've got, from there you can download the guide. There's also an option to book a 15-minute call for just, if you have a specific use case that you're interested in, more than happy to talk with you about it and be able to see how we can put some of these tools to use for you. But there are any questions from folks out there? I did see one about, great for once you've hired someone, but recruiting the right person. But yeah, I mean, you can use the AI to inform, job descriptions and maybe personality traits to look for. The only caution, and one of my, I work with an HR attorney out of Easton, and every time I've made interview questions or anything, I always send those over to her to make sure that I'm not asking the wrong thing, because it turns out there are a lot of minefields here in the state of Massachusetts. So, I send those over. So just with the hiring process, always got to be appropriately careful. But yeah, I've had it make a few job ad portions or at least punching it up. But yeah, again, anything for the specific hiring process, just be careful just because of the environment that we're in. But it is good for, for helping punch up the job ad. As far as posting it for you, I mean, that requires you to set one up that would have hooks into Indeed or your payroll system or any other sites. But, if you're using Indeed, you could pretty quickly move it over there. Hiring process is a whole other can of worms, to be honest. Excellent. Any other questions from folks out there? Ryan, did you have any?
No, no. This is the problem when I've read all this before. I'm like, oh, I understand this now that I've seen it 19 times. But no, I think it's good, and especially once you have these systems in place and a knowledge base, it's easy to have people keep querying that when they have questions. and when they want a refresher or they just want some basic piece of information. Because I know you get all this information, you try to soak it up in the first 90 days, and then some of the stuff that you don't look at all the time or do every day kind of falls by the wayside. So having a resource that you can just pull in like natural language and be like, "Hey, chat, what's going on with that thing? How do I use this part of the program?" And it just being able to spit it out versus, you know, all these websites and programs, their guides and instructions can be very obtuse.
Or if you have to reach out to support on a how-to, it's always a roll of the dice if they tell you, okay, that's not what we do at support, or no, you're on hold for forever. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that's the case. Like, you know, if we have to call Sonic Wall, the firewall vendor, I always warn my staff, it's like, get ready. That's your afternoon. So,
Yeah. Or like asking your coworkers, like, "Oh, yeah, all those things are fine, but if you have something you can go to first, I get a good answer, and it's it's not taking much of your time, it's not taking much of anyone else's time. It's a real net savings to invest in."
absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate you spending some time with me here on a Thursday late morning. I hope this was useful. I know that was a lot, but I hope you had at least a couple takeaways or something you could go back and be able to supercharge new hires or even interns, frankly, for getting anybody to do something new. And yeah, start with those job descriptions and go from there. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a
Thanks
wonderful
so much,
day.
everyone. Bye, Will.
We'll see you next month.